Hello, good afternoon, or indeed good morning. Thank you for joining us on this. What appears to be a very festive Talking Teams. You've gone whole hog there, Graham. I've spoken to you before I've introduced you. I'm joined today by Graham, my old partner in crime. Graham, do you want to just give a quick recap on who you are and what you do for anyone new?
Sure. So, hi, my name is Graham Cropley. I'm the Global Head of Consulting over here at LoopUp. So, I lead the consulting team, which mostly handles pre-sales, but also some design activities and technical authorities throughout projects.
Very good. So today, you and me are supposed to be talking a little bit about Teams roadmap, what that looks like, and what it looks like into 2022, and with a focus on enterprises. I think, you and I sat down the other day to come up with, a kind of a top 10, if you like, of things that have changed over the last year, and maybe we were going to divide it into top 5 things that have happened and top 5 things that are coming. And the reality is that actually we filled 2 PowerPoint decks worth of bullets with information out of just looking back through the last 3 months worth of, tech communities blog posts,
Yeah.
right? So I thought what might be a slightly more interesting way of doing this is kind of a quick recap on the big old list, I think we called it, of cool stuff that has changed in Teams, and then kind of go into therefore what our top 10 things are that are sort of announced, maybe not released. Some of them are out,
Mhm.
and then narrow that down to our favorite ones before we wrap out. So, I think it was pretty eye-opening. I mean, it always is how fast the rate of change in Teams is with stuff. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
looking at our lists, transcription, right? So transcriptions in Teams meetings and in Teams calls, that wasn't a thing. So what that means at the moment, when that released, is anybody who is in a meeting can have it transcribed and the text is available post. That's pretty cool stuff. That's pretty clever, right?
Yeah, and that's clever in itself, but also the fact that it doesn't just do captions, but it also live translates at the same time as writing the captions. That's also a fantastic thing I saw recently.
And meeting layouts, not quite what we're doing here. Unfortunately, we're not using Teams as the platform to stream to LinkedIn because that's not possible at this point in time. Although it might be soon because of one of the other features that we can talk about. But again, if we look back, sort of this time a year ago, it was kind of gallery view was the important thing, wasn't it? Where it was being
Yeah.
able to do those multi tiles. But now we've got together mode, we've got um, dev options for being able to upload your own custom together modes and position people where you like on the screen, on
Mhm.
pillars and plinths, and in cinema seats and whatever else,
I
if
think the
that's your
roller
kind of
coaster was the most popular one I saw on Twitter. Yeah.
thing. What else? Anything that's a particular favorite of yours out of our quick list? I mean, we've got music mode, Apple CarPlay support, App Store.
There's so much, to be honest. I mean, breakout rooms, has been a huge demand from a lot of companies in education specifically. The meeting recap afterwards, so you can get like the nice view of what attachments and things were shared and said what and when. Also the attendance reports of who participated in
Mhm.
meetings.
So
There's
breakout rooms is interesting. What is a breakout room? Like what? Because Zoom had that for quite a while, didn't it? Before
who,
Microsoft
sorry?
kind
I'm
of.
joking. So a breakout room is the ability to automatically or manually split a larger meeting into smaller meetings, and then the host or organizer can go between the different breakout rooms independently and then bring everyone back in afterwards.
And even stuff like that as a piece of functionality has evolved since it's come out, right? So when it came out, you could in a meeting only the organizer was capable of saying this person goes this room, this room, this room, this room, and now you can kind of preset those things up. But again, it's not standing still even when stuff hits the ground, is it?
Mm. Another one was the Teams Admin Center Cloud Shell. That was
Hmm.
quite a welcome addition, certainly from the consultant engineering team I've heard.
Yeah, and again, do you want to just elaborate on what that is?
Yeah, it's the ability to run those PowerShell commands in a browser without having to install or deploy things locally, and it helps with sort of automation and getting access to systems and overall management, really.
And I guess that's kind of helpful for one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later. Where for what we do with a direct routing as a service platform, you have to configure individual users using PowerShell scripts, right? Or you do them in bulk using scripts. But having Cloud Shell is great because you don't have to spin up separate PowerShell, install the right modules, make the right connections. You can from TAC click the little command style icon up in the top corner, and boom, you've got access to a window to be able to run what you need to do, right?
Absolutely.
Calling essentials, that was something that was announced fairly recently as well. That looks like that's Microsoft sort of pushing telephony related activities into to sort of the small business space as well, which is pretty good to see. That's kind of previously been the purview of enterprise grade license and equivalent, hasn't it?
Yes, it's good to see the smaller end sort of getting the same attention and features and functionality as the larger side. A lot of businesses find it very easy to start up with just a new subscription, get a new tenant, sign up, and start using all the features. It's like an instant business in a box. You can copyright that if you like.
And the other one we had on this list, in fact, actually two of them. We've got the broadcast dev kit based on NDI. So NDI was saying NDI is a way of being able to kind of get access to the audio and video streams inside a Teams call or a Teams meeting, isn't it? Which you can then use for processing in other ways. I mean, I'm using OBS here to do kind of some of my background and my bits and pieces. OBS is a tool that you could use to capture streams coming out of a Teams meeting. And again, I guess, it's about the flexibility that opens up. If you've got particular sort of broadcast grade equipment that you need to use, that opens the door to being able to do fancy things beyond just Christmas backgrounds, mere Christmas jumpers and snow.
Well, this Christmas jumper is real. It's not an overlay. It's
Oh, is it
probably a
not?
shame
Okay,
to
well, you
say.
need to lift your beard up a little bit. We'll just check that there. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
But the other thing,
the
sorry,
NDI
go
out
for it.
feature of the NDI out feature of Teams has been really useful. You can do a live event for thousands of attendees, obviously, anyway. To do it straight from the Teams client into the live event, you're limited with a few different layouts you can have, either content or content and video or video. But to be able to do that with a free open source solution like OBS, to have the video streams independently from Teams into OBS to control your layout completely in any way you like, and then push that back into the live event, all
And
without
audio
using
streams, right?
an audio streams, to mix in third-party content and all sorts of things we need to do.
Because that could be where you're needing to use wireless mics or those throw boxes that you see at conferences when they're a thing. That sort of
It's an
stuff. The
excuse
other
to buy an
thing,
audio mixing desk on expenses.
exactly. The other thing I quite like though is the way Microsoft implement these things. So it's like at the moment when you do call recording that you get a notification in the client to say that this call is being recorded. Same when you do transcription, there's a notification that this meeting or call is being transcribed. And it's the same thing when NDI is enabled, that you get a notification to all participants who are in there saying that someone else might be able to, or has access outside of the Teams bubble to the media that's being present in the call. And it's quite nice seeing that security boundary and that consideration being given to those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. The notifications inside the Teams client have always been fantastic. I mean, even not quite this year, but beforehand, if you're on a mobile phone and your battery was getting low, the fact that it would say maybe try turning off video to help conserve power with the mobile device is just really intuitive, nice user-friendly features to help you get the best out of your meeting.
And then the last one before we move on to our kind of top 10 list or our Big 10, whatever we want to call it, was push to talk, which I thought was quite interesting. We've had kind of walkie-talkie modes, as is called on mobiles, but that's appearing in other places as well. So it's kind of the reverse of what you would use the mute button for normally. Normally, you would press the mute button to mute yourself in a call. But we all know, back in the days where we had large meetings and big open spaces, that sometimes that was, not the best experience because people would forget to mute or wouldn't be considerate about muting. So you can actually do the inverse of that, which is you have to, press and hold the button on the speaker phone when you want to chip in to talk in the meeting. So again, it's quite a nice little small thing, but can make quite a big difference in some scenarios, I guess.
Yeah, especially if you're in a hybrid meeting scenario where you've got a few people in a room and a few people remotely. If you're in a room having a side conversation, you don't necessarily want to reach over and hold mute button down while you're doing that. So you've got the option of either mute on or off, or if you do want to say something, you do want to chip into a larger meeting, you can just hold the button down and speak. I think that'd be a great feature coming soon.
So let's hit up our top 10. So number 10, then we've got scope for business removal, or scope for business online removal. I guess that should technically be, to be precise. So go on then. What happened there? What's that all about?
It was the sunsetting, which I think is the polite name of saying that they basically turned off the services in the background in Office 365. Less impactful than I thought. I think we all kind of assumed that it would be quite a significant thing, but the rate of adoption for Teams and the amount of businesses that were pushed or coerced or persuaded or even wanted to go to Teams has been at a fantastic rate over the past few years anyway. So I don't think you had much impact, certainly not with the customers or companies I've been talking to.
No, and also I guess it was a bit of a soft landing, wasn't it? Because the date was kind of back in June, July timeframe, and there were a few organisations, especially larger ones, that sort of had a slightly extended date where it wasn't like the servers were being turned off and ripped out. And in fact, I believe some of those servers are still there because they're part of kind of the Teams infrastructure, to do specific roles while that is, being being replaced. So yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. It's very, very surprising to me that it was such a minimal impact. I didn't notice it with any customers or any of the social media or anything. No one
Yeah,
kind of was screaming and shouting, which was very good. Well done, Microsoft, really.
yeah, absolutely. I think the large companies that had online also had a huge server presence, so they're able to move the users back to on-prem if they needed Stripe for any
Hmm.
sort of interrupt for any reason, and then the rest of it was a plan to go to Teams anyway, so it just helped them focus their efforts and get the project in line and work to the deadlines.
So number 9, we've got end-to-end encryption. So this is something that kind of feeds off the back of the conversation we were having before about Microsoft sort of paying attention to how stuff is handled and managed. So end-to-end encryption, at the moment, the way I put it is pretty much everything Teams puts down on the network is encrypted, right? SRTP for the media, all the signaling is inside, TLS trunks or trunks is the wrong word, but
Yeah.
encrypted tunnels, etc. So why would we need end-to-end encryption? What does that do for us? And I understand there's a few catches there as well that you were looking at.
Yeah, there's quite a few features that you can't do if you do end-to-end encryption, and I guess when you think about it, technically they do kind of make sense. So just to clear up for anyone that isn't aware, like you say, everything is encrypted anyway, but the difference between end-to-end encryption is it's a private encrypted session just between the two participants on a call. So that it isn't going through a middle sort of server or service that decrypts and does any sort of back-to-back encryption. It's
Which
really
would be a
end-to-end.
Microsoft-owned service anyway in those
Yes,
scenarios
indeed,
where
yeah.
it is. Yeah.
But if you're familiar with the likes of Telegraph or WhatsApp or other sort of consumer grade chat platforms, they're already high on
Mhm.
security. So yeah, now we have that in Teams as well, which is good to see. It's a great feature. But the limitations are more around the fact that if we have a secure conversation between two people that each end only knows the keys for the other person, then you wouldn't expect to be able to add a third person in because you'd have to then share the keys around. So
Yeah.
certain things like call escalation, adding in PSTN calls, those sorts of things aren't available if you start it as an end-to-end encrypted call. There's a good document on Microsoft website, obviously, docs.microsoft.com to find out all the
Well,
details. But
that's the thing, all of these features that we're talking about, all of them are,
yeah,
pretty thoroughly documented these days.
yeah,
So one that I picked to put on this list, just umming and ahhing about whether it should be high up or low down, but I kind of like it, is the Teams meeting display.
yeah,
So Teams meeting display is kind of one of these different categories of devices that Microsoft is starting to open up. You've got kind of the mobile cradle dock, you've got the Teams display, which is kind of the companion device, but the meeting displays are designed to solve that use case where third parties were coming up with their own solutions, but this is now an endorsed official form factor of having a display, on the wall outside your meeting room that shows you what's booked. You can interact with that to some degree, and it'll do things like occupancy count if the equipment in your room. It'll show that on the outside, etc. So not a major thing, but to me, it's part of that ever increasing or ever evolving feature set that you get. It's quite nice to see kind of new hardware. And let's face it, we all quite like playing with different types of hardware, right?
yeah. For me, it feels like they kind of broke the seal a little bit. So there's been obviously link room systems, Stripe room systems, and then the SRS v2 was around for quite some time. It felt like it, with not a huge amount of development happening on that because it was all happening within the Teams client and the back-end services itself. And then maybe over the past 12 months, I guess, as a lot of countries and places have been coming out of the more serious lockdowns we've had previously through this time, that there's been a lot of focus from hardware vendors, manufacturers, and Microsoft as well on actual in-person devices. So, like you say, the
Hmm.
occupancy count is a very useful feature if you're looking at oversubscribed meeting rooms. But yeah, to have those displays come out, the sort of the personal phone device that I was about to grab that's too far out of reach. And yeah, devices are really coming on strong. I think from a lot of different vendors, have got some really nice, unique projects coming out.
Good stuff. Next up, we've got real-time call quality analytics. Now, analytics is boring, right? But fairly necessary. So with Teams, we've talked about before that you've got ACD for the call diagnostics, you've got CQD for trending. What does real-time call analytics help us with?
Unfortunately, it's not another three-letter acronym, so we can't read it off in the same way. But right now, it's for meetings, scheduled and ad hoc meetings. So when you're in a meeting, as an administrator, not a participant, you can actually see in the Teams admin center how the call is currently progressing. And it's been quite a big ask for many, many years from Link and Stripe server through till now. As if someone says this call's bad and it's currently in progress, how can anyone help?
Yeah.
You can start looking at some network stats, maybe port utilization on your switches if that's a thing that you have configured. But you didn't really get any insight to how the call was actually doing. And then over the recent months, there's been the tool health from a client view, so I can click the button and see what my network's like and latency,
Mhm.
and it can inform me on what's sort of going wrong. But also an admin can now go into Admin Center, look at the streams for each participant and see all the different metrics as it's happening.
And so that's made it on our list because, if you're a company that takes your calling quality seriously, it's another tool that you can use to kind of squash and sit on any trouble or problematic areas and make sure that everything's running
Yeah,
perfectly, isn't it?
it improves your internal customer services. If someone complains about a bad call, if you can jump on while the call's happening and say, actually, 4 out of 5 people are fine, looks like it's your end, you've answered it straight away and you haven't got to do troubleshooting afterwards, and people are too busy when the call finishes, all those things. So it's a great help, really is.
You sound like one of those surveys. 4 out of 5 people said the call was fine.
If you ask
Um,
dentists and cats, I'm sure they'll say the same.
yeah. So next we've got unassigned numbers. So this is one of the things that is very much
Mm.
PSTN calling related, to do with telephony. So I guess previously, you had to do a little bit of fudging if you needed to do something creative with your number ranges, right? Usually you would have a person or a resource account has a number assigned to them, and that was that. If you needed to have sort of an old number that someone used, you would have to set up a queue or something to answer that. With unassigned numbers, you can say, any number that in a particular set is not assigned to anybody, then do this activity with it, right?
Yeah, so I think it's just about a year or so now we've had the resource accounts for the tool queues where you could then could assign multiple numbers, and the Microsoft Phone System virtual user license, so you didn't have to pay for a license specifically to attach that to a queue, so
Mhm.
then you could handle all the numbers that have been taken off levers and that sort of thing. Slightly tongue in cheek, I think it was about 3 years ago when we had feature parity with Stripe, if you remember that presentation from Microsoft. But we now finally do have unassigned numbers available. So you don't have to do manipulation on SBCs to get a number to a queue afterwards. It's just, if it's not assigned to an endpoint of any type, a user, a queue, or anything else, it falls into that bucket and to be handled accordingly, either a message
So
or a
it's it's
divert
it's
somewhere
it's
else.
not necessarily unblocking anything new. It's just making it a lot easier to do stuff natively,
Yeah,
right?
to
To handle
configure and
those kind
manage
of
and to
things.
deal with that scenario. Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm actually gonna change the order of the next two. So the next one is call queues and channels, because we kind of talked a little bit about call queues on the previous one. So call queues are the things that go hand in hand with auto attendant. Auto attendant deals with, this number during business hours, out of hours, on holiday, do X Y Z with it, and the queue is send the call to these destinations. Um, you know, Based on particular criteria for how we decide which person is going to get the call. And that's not full on contact center. That's still where you would need some third party software to do that, but it is based on agent availability, not agent skill set, etc. So what's the change there by integrating that with channels? And by channels, we're talking about channels inside a team, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit it goes towards in terms of visibility. So one of the issues previously with the call queues is you didn't get any sort of live wallboards or to see what was going on or to see the calls and the voicemails in there. So bringing that sort of scenario into a channel with inside Teams, you can kind of group it together. So you can see the list of all the missed calls or the recent calls or the voicemails made to that queue, which is great insight, really. And also, you can manage your availability if you want to opt in and opt out of that queue from the channel.
Yeah.
And then that combined with another feature that I've not quite mentioned on either of this so far is the fact that you can dial out on behalf of a queue or another
Mhm.
number. So that if you're an agent and have to manage 2 or 3 different languages, perhaps for a support queue, and you want to call back one of your end users or a customer in a certain language, you can call
From a
from
local number,
just,
yeah.
yeah, one of the channels that's related to that number. Absolutely.
So is that part of kind of simplifying the most common call workflows, right? And that then ties in with our next one, which is the availability of attendant consoles. So, attendant consoles are designed to bridge the gap, or bridge the gap is that quite the right word? But the Teams client is not necessarily designed to handle high volumes of calls, because each call, comes up as a pop up in the bottom right hand corner. You
Mm.
can only have one call in play at a time, so you end up with multiple windows for different calls if you're hopping between them. Attendant consoles are designed for high throughput environments, like a reception area where there might be, a reasonable number of concurrent calls where you're putting people on hold, you're finding out who to transfer to, etc., etc.
Mm.
And attendant consoles is something that we had again back in the oldie days. But for some reason, or not for some reason, it used to be that the attendant consoles manipulated the Skype client on the local machine. Because Teams is architected in a different way, that wasn't possible. But we do now have, it was kind of the last pieces of the API puzzle has been unlocked on Microsoft's side, so the third parties can now deal with manipulating those calls and doing call transfers. And you've got the likes of, I think Landis launched their Attendant console just actually earlier this week, or maybe the back end of last week. Luware have their version of an Attendant console. So we're starting to see these things that have been sat in the wings waiting for that final piece to kind of get unlocked, and now coming through. And that really helps with, those fairly common scenarios of how do you handle, front of house or other particular areas, right?
Yeah, the previous message has been you're going from Stripe or something else to Teams. How do you handle that scenario? If there's no Attendant consoles natively available, which maybe there used to before, then try the Teams client. It is still designed to be an end user client. So if a call comes in, it's supposed to be for me, so I should be talking to them. But obviously that scenario does exist, as you mentioned, with secretaries and other receptionists and scenarios, EAs and so on, where there's still a few more features that we ever had before in the Teams client. So the fact that you can transfer blind or consult first, but also transfer via IM as well. So to have that call control on screen to then IM somebody from within that same window rather than having to go out to it to search, it helps streamline slightly. But yeah, I'm really pleased to see the Attendant consoles coming through now.
So we're into our last three. And one of them will answer one of the questions that's come up here about direct routing numbers. But kind of next on our list was this SIP gateway phone registration. So, to me, this is one of those, it's great, and I'm really happy with what we've got, but I kind of want to see it evolve a little bit further. And I guess it's like we were talking earlier, that these things like breakout rooms, the breakout rooms at launch is very different to the breakout rooms now. So hopefully this time next year, this bit of functionality will have evolved quite a lot. So SIP gateway phone registration means the ability to take SIP standards-based phones and register them into your Teams environment. And the reason that's important is while Teams has a fairly broad native ecosystem of devices, you've got companies who've invested in hardware from other vendors, and you don't want to have to throw those devices out if you still need them in particular use cases. Now, as you and I know, usually there's quite a consultative process you go through with a company, with their end users around actually transitioning. Most people go sort of 80-20% between headset and handset. So actually, it's not like you would necessarily use this to plug all of the handset gaps. You might still want to use different handsets, or indeed have people not using handsets at all. But what are the vendors that are supported by this? It's Cisco, Polycom.
Cisco, Yealink, and Audio Codes,
Yeah. So where you have some investment in that estate at the moment, depending on the make and model, you can register those into Teams as an endpoint in their own right.
And it absolutely shouldn't be your first choice or first port of call. Obviously, there's headsets on other devices as well to use. Great headsets, get to work on them all the time. Phones are still around, like fax machines, but not quite so bad. So it's kind of, you should really ask yourself why you want to use your existing phones. And it's generally a trust thing. You've recently made some investment into all this hardware, and it's still around places, and you got spares in a different office, so you can relocate them to a new place, that sort of thing. So it's probably more the common area phone or like a shared hot desk when that becomes more acceptable to do, where you might want to utilize the money you spent previously. There's still a big question to ask: do you really just need a very basic phone that missing a lot of the Teams features and a lot of the things like presence and contact search, those sorts of things that will probably come at some point maybe, but then it really depends on the firmware on the phone, and it's a lot of unknowns. So it's really just a very basic lift the receiver, get a dial tone, dial a number. That's what you'll receive from this. So is that really what you want to give to the users in that location?
But for break rooms or front of house or what have you, where you just need a phone to be a phone, it potentially unlocks.
It fills a gap, absolutely. Yeah. If it makes it slightly easier to save a bit of money on a budget, to know that you can then replace the phones in a year's time or whenever they're more acceptable to do so, it will help.
Yeah. And in terms of, saying that hopefully there'll be some improvements and things there, I guess that's in terms of, from my point of view, coverage for the types of devices available. And there are some things to consider that kind of, once you've pointed them at Teams and got them downloading a specific version of firmware to do what they need to do, you can't then necessarily manage or provision those devices with whatever tools you had. But, they will be visible and manageable on the team side. So
one of the things to point out there, I'm not a Cisco expert by any stretch, but to use the Cisco phones, the few devices that are supported, you still also need to have a MPP firmware version, so the multi-protocol phone firmware, which you may have to pay a charge to get a license to allow you to migrate the firmware from those phones.
So to
So it's not
unlock that
always,
from your old
yeah,
vendor, possibly. Okay.
yeah.
So the next one's quite a biggie for us, really, and this is Operator Connect and indeed Operator Connect conferencing. So, the question that I mentioned that we had come in there was, will direct routing numbers be visible in the Teams admin center? And this is exactly why Operator Connect has been built and released, right? So, calling plans where you take your numbers from Microsoft, you do it all through TAC or PowerShell if you want to, but you request your numbers, you see them in Admin Center, and you assign them to users. With direct routing, you don't see any numbers or have a notion of what numbers are available to assign them, because you do that through PowerShell. You say this user has this number, these 10 users have these 10 numbers, etc., etc. What Operator Connect does is it kind of removes some of the level of configuration you need. You don't need to set up gateways, you don't need to set up routes. What you do is a provider, you go and pick them from the admin center and say, I have a relationship, or I want a relationship with this provider to provide me numbers in these locations. You go talk to the provider, they do whatever they need to do on their side, and then it links your tenant with their environment. And it might be still that it's using the same direct routing infrastructure behind the scenes, but now inside TAC, you can see lists of the numbers that you have that the provider will have said are available to you. So these are your numbers, and you can request new numbers. You can allocate them to users. So it's kind of bridging that gap between the flexibility from flexibility of direct routing and the ease of use and manageability of calling plans.
Yeah. And with that infrastructure in place, I mean, this is unfounded, but the fact that a provider can have the Operator Connect APIs, maybe they'll extend that out at some point.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
if it lets you have
from
your own SBCs to control them in a certain way, you still maybe got a disparate solution where you've got Microsoft numbers in the admin portal right now, Operator Connect numbers in the future in the admin portal when you sign up for that.
Mhm.
You still got the direct routing side to manage. So it would be great if number management was a very prominent feature of the Teams admin center from all the different ways of getting it in there.
Yeah,
So
or
that's
you do
maybe a
it
hope for
through
next year.
whoever your provider is, right? So watch this space, I guess, from our
Yeah.
point of view. And then there's Operator Connect conferencing, which is sort of tacked on the same sort of infrastructure and notion. But the idea there is that at the moment where you have an audio conferencing license, you can only take numbers provided by Microsoft that are usually shared. You can port your own and you can request new ones. But Operator Connect conferencing allows you to, again, through a relationship with a provider, have access to or unlock access to whatever numbers they have around the world that might be specific numbers for your organization, etc., etc.
So that helps with countries where perhaps you can't port numbers and you've got numbers for meetings already published on certain places. The world's going much more towards a one-to-one meeting rather than these virtual meeting rooms that used to be your personal space that you could dial into any time, but numbers are still out there. So to
Yeah.
be able to use those, not lose them.
And then, so our top feature, which might not seem very interesting or exciting at first glance, but I think we can hopefully
I'm
make a
easily
case
pleased.
for why that's on this list. But the SLA has changed around Teams and calling, right, or phone system, as we should say.
That's right, yeah. So the whole Office 365 previously has been under 3.9, so 99.9% service credit based uptime. But specifically, like you say, phone system is now going to 4.9s, 99.99%, which is, I think, if I do the maths, which actually we worked out earlier,
We
is
did,
roughly,
because I'm looking at it. It's on the PowerPoint.
I'm trying to build it up,
Oh, sorry.
roughly 8 hours and 47 minutes per year, down to 52 minutes total per year.
Of
So
downtime that you can expect against that SLA, right?
with those percentages, yeah.
Yeah. And
But it's more significant than just the downtime and service credits backed. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about what it kind of means strategically.
go for it.
I was offering you the chance
Oh,
to do
me?
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were filling in more detail about what happens. I mean, the reason for me that that's made the top of the list is it just shows that Microsoft understands the importance of PSTN availability to businesses around phone system. It's something that has to work and has to be available. And it less so these days, but there could be, or there might be, some trepidation about putting those kind of services out there in the cloud outside of your organizational boundary. But the use cases for telephony are changing, and it's the types of things that companies do with it are changing. So the fact that Microsoft is backing their offering of phone system with that kind of an SLA just goes to prove how important it is to them, for me.
Yeah, and it's a strange shift from sort of telephony to more online communications, whereas previously everyone had a phone, it was just pervasive, it was everywhere. But now the people that have the phones need it for a certain reason, because they're dealing with customers or external contacts or third parties. So it's almost more important for the fewer people that have telephony for it to actually work. And yeah, it goes to show that the treatment from Microsoft to make sure that there's this special place for phones, because it is so important to enterprise and smaller customers too.
Good stuff. Well, that was kind of our top 10 most interesting things. Is there a particular favorite that you had off that list? Don't you steal my one?
I'm thinking the Start for Business removal is probably my favorite, just because you either, as an IT consultant, you've got two choices. You either keep up to date with exams or you wait for the tech to expire. So there we go.
What, so the tech expired, so now you need to go do your exams? Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, wait till the one after Teams. Yeah, it's all fine.
Do you know any good training material available? No, don't.
There may be a book published by which direction?
So my favorite, I'm going for a wild card entry here. So my favorite is something that we haven't actually talked about, because it's not really directly telephony related, but it's shared channels. So the idea with shared channels is, at the moment, you can have a team, you have your channels underneath it, and you can have private channels. So private channel is, it has a smaller subset of security access, so that a smaller group of people can access that. You still have to be members of the top channel. But there's one of the things that I find suboptimal about using Teams, particularly in a scenario with different organizations where you're needing to work on a project together, is this kind of flipping out of your tenant and into another. And I know there's things that should be coming around breakthrough to make sure your calls come through, etc. But shared channels, I think, is a really interesting idea, that it takes a channel and it separates it from a team. And it means that you can then have that channel either showing up inside multiple teams inside your organization, if you want to, still the same channel. So any content that's put in it, any chat messages, any files, associated stuff, are visible in over here and here and here. But you can also have that surfaced in an external team as well. Again, because it's Microsoft, like we've talked about, everything is wrapped up in the appropriate security measures, and there's a whole bunch of permissions and stuff that needs to be turned on and validated, and checks and balances in place to make sure only the right people see the right stuff. But shared channels, to me, I think over the next year is going to unlock, when it launches or releases, quite a lot of scenarios to improve that collaboration experience, which to me just drives the usage of Teams higher, which drives the stuff we love, which is the phone system.
So, like all things, if you look at anything in Microsoft, you'll see that security, compliance, and governance is the sort of the key focus on everything they do. But it's the use case, it's the usability, it's the experience that's the actual driver behind making the things happen. And yeah, to get away from tenant switching, just so I can have all the channels that I'm responsible for providing input into in the same place, is another great feature.
Good stuff. Great. Well, that kind of wraps up our list of things. In terms of upcoming events, we've got a program that's under review of what we're going to do in the new year, but looking a little bit more detail around things like devices, how you might approach some of those migration tasks away from whatever your current phone system is, those kinds of things. So again, if there's anything in particular that someone would like to hear about, feel free to pop it in the chat next to LinkedIn. We'll get that on the list. But other than that, I guess from both of us and from me to you, Graham, happy holidays, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.